Okay, so for this project, what we're going to be doing is texturing a coin and a gem. Now, we're going to be making it with a specific aesthetic in mind. So the style of this has already been chosen for you. Before we even get into that, let's look at what models we're dealing with. So this is just a cylinder that has been flattened down beyond what your default cylinder is. So it's on its side and named coin. If I hide that thing and turn on this next one, it's a rupee or a gem. I'm super original. You might notice where that came from. It's called Nintendo. That's kind of what we're emulating here, is a 2D looking gem that has some shininess added to it that we're going to paint on this model, and then the same thing, we're going to add some bevel and emboss in Photoshop to make a coin. Now, that may sound complicated. It is not complicated using the methods and the tools that I'm going to show you in Photoshop. So let's look back at our 3D model here with the coin, and let's look at what the UVs are doing. Now remember, the UVs are what lays out a model for us to be able to paint. So if we look at what that model looks like, if I go into my UVs and my UV editor, there's my coin. So I have the round part, and that is representing both the front and back. And then I have this part right here. That's representing the entire side of the coin. Now, or the edge of the coin, not the side. This is split in half. If I were to go and right click and go to UV shell and click on this and move this up, there's actually two of those. But the reason why I did it this way is because this is the same object, or it's the same texture I'm going to add over and over and over again. If I were to just sit there and create this as one long strip, it's going to look super tiny if I had it end to end. And it's also going to look kind of like a waste of space. I'd rather let the front of the coin and the back of the coin take up more space than the edging of that. So these are design decisions that you make as an artist on what needs to have the most amount of space that you're texturing. So that's looking pretty good. I'm going to close that, minimize that, and I'm going to open up my coin, or my jewel, or gem, rupee, whatever. So we got this thing. If I go into my UV editor, that's what it looks like. Now it might look a little bit flattened out. It is. That's okay. I'm maximizing my space. If I analyze what this is showing me, so I'm going to select over here. It's the front and back. Select over here and over there. It's front and back. How I ended up making this UV layout is I went to my front panel in Maya, and I went into my UVs, and I did a camera based. And what camera based does is it just projects a camera straight through that viewport for you. So that's how I made that. You don't have to do any UV unwrapping for this. You're going to texture. But before we texture, we have to do something. First thing I'm going to do is save my file so I can find it. Oop. So I'm going to go into my work folder that I use, and I'm going to make gem and coin, and gem and coin start. That sounds good. I'll save that. And now that I have that, now I'm going to open up my UV editor. So I'm going to go into my UVs, UV editor. And sometimes you'll see that the menu will pop out separate from this. This will still let us work. It's just the toolkit and the editor are separated a little bit. That's fine. What we need to be able to do here is save out this data so we can work with it in Photoshop. So to be able to do this, I need to go and inside of my image, I'm going to take a UV snapshot. Now, why is it a UV snapshot? Well, because a UV snapshot is basically just taking a picture of where the UVs are on the sheet. They can move around. That means that they'll be in a different position if they move, which means that they're not going to have the same texture applied to it in the same space. So snapshot is literally that. You're taking a picture of where the UVs currently are. So we're going to do that. I'm going to tell us to take a UV snapshot. And I'm going to change this to a PNG. I'm going to change my output. And that's going to go to my texture. And we'll call that gem. And I'm going to do UV at the end of that. And so it's a PNG, but holy cow, 2048 by 2048 for this. This is way, 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 way too much. So I'm going to go 512 by 512. Am I not displaying anything for you guys? You can see OBS? You can see this? Make some noise. All right. There you go. So, I have the object selected. I went to my image UV snapshot. It gave me my dialog of what I wanted to be able to save. So UV snapshot, here it is. I've got the name, gem UV. It's going where it's supposed to go. It's going to be a PNG. And I want this to be 512 by 512. Even that is way, way, way bigger than I would usually go, but this is your first time doing this, so we're going to keep it that big. So 512 by 512, I will hit apply. It did it. It put one over there. I can close that. And now, Photoshop. So, Photoshop looks like this when you start. Your account is linked to when you sign in. So you will log in, and I'm going to go into open. Inside of Photoshop, or my work drive, I'm going to go to that file that I just created. And that's going to be under my gem and coin, gem UV. That's what I want to work with. So I'm going to hit open. Okay, there it is. Beautiful. That's impossible to work with. You can sort of see these lines. So it looks just like that UV editor that we were in, but it's super hard to see because of how thin those lines are. So let's fix that. The first thing I want you to realize is to be able to zoom in and out. That's the Z key. So if you press the Z key, you can zoom in or out by using your left mouse button. If you if you've activated that zoom and you want to zoom out, just hold down the Alt key and left click, and now you'll be able to zoom out. Now you'll notice over here it's even telling you your percentages. So in case if you're wondering, are you all the way out of that document, just look over there and it should tell you there. You can also change those settings right here. So Z key to start your zoom in and zoom out while holding down the Alt key. That's this tool right here that's activated the zoom. All right. Now, my first layer that's in here, you'll notice there's this layers panel. All that this has activated right now is one layer, and that layer, if I poke that eye, makes that really tiny line disappear. That line work's gone. So I want that to be there, but I want to accent how much I can see of it. So what I'm going to end up doing is going into this button right here. This is an add layer style. If I press that, I'm going to go to stroke. And what stroke's going to do is allow for that line, any pixels that it finds, it's going to add a stroke around those pixels. So with this line, it's adding a stroke around those lines. If I need to see it better, I can increase that stroke size or decrease it. It should update. Let me go on the outside. There we go. So easy way to be able to work. I'm going to stay on the inside, leave that alone. I'm going to hit OK. Now I have a layer that's on, and I have effects that are on. To be able to turn all the effects, we can do more effects than that, on or off. At the same time, you'll poke the effects area. To turn off just the stroke effect, you'll poke that eyeball. Okay. Now, I'm being sloppy. I need to make sure I name this thing a thing I can make sense to myself, because it's going to get complicated. So what I need to name this It's probably UVs. So I'm going to call that gem UVs. So all I did was double click on the text line right there, and I input something and I hit enter. Now I can stay organized. Now right now this is just a PNG. That's not going to save any data to it that I change. It's only going to save it as a still image. A flat image, I should say, not something that can be workable. To be able to make this into the primary file that we work with, which is a PSD, you have to save it. Go to File, Save As. There's the UV of the gem. I want this to be a PSD. And so we'll call this not a UV anymore, but we'll call this gem texture. And so now I'm going to hit save. Sure, we'll save over whatever that other one was. All right. Now, I need to look at my reference. This is an important thing as a texture artist, and also the reason why we have multiple monitors. When we're working, we shouldn't just be thinking that whatever we're doing in Photoshop is okay. We should double check. And those double checking devices that we have are your eyeballs. And you should be able to point one over at that other monitor and look at references, some resources that you should have. I don't know what that is. I got the shovel, don't worry. So we got this right here, and this is what I'm going to work with to make that jewel. Now, let's take a quick second here and look at really what this jewel is representing. It's actually not that complicated. There's not even a gradient on these pieces. It's solid colors with a line across some of the ridges, and there's a line going this way and that way. It's mainly shapes that we'd work with. So that's how I'm going to start with this. I'm going to actually start by creating a new layer, which is this little button right here. It looks like a little folded piece of paper. I want that to be underneath my gem UVs. I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to keep that on. But for this, I'm going to call this my base color. And that base color, you can do whatever you want to do. I'm going to stick with the color that I'm currently looking at right here. But we all know rupees come in all kinds, and the green kinds suck. But the yellow ones those are the good ones, right? But I'm going to go with green just because that's what my reference looks like. All right, so I got that. I'm going to do something by getting the color in here. I could sit there and hit the B key and then start doing this. But that's terrible, and it's going to take forever. That's our brush tool. Instead, I'm going to go into, so I have this color selected. You'll notice it's over here, showing up here. That's our active color. Go to Edit, and I'm going to go to Fill. So Edit Fill, if I press that button, it's asking, what do you want to do? We can do the background color, which is this one right here, or the foreground color, or content aware, or pattern. I want the foreground color for now, and I'm going to hit OK. And it filled that whole layer. And as a matter of fact, you can even see right here that that whole thing filled. Now that I have that, I know that if I were to save this image out, it would look kind of like this on my model. So I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to go to Save. I'm going to open up Maya. And I'm going to my Hypershade. So I opened up my Hypershade. I'm going to go to Create, Materials, Lambert. So I'm opening another one. Remember, Lambert 1, leave it alone. You don't want to mess around with Lambert 1. You want to change out Lambert 2s or anything like that, but Lambert 1 is what's controlling all of your objects that you're working on. So Lambert 2 is a good way to go. I'm going to rename that. So instead of it being Lambert 2, I'm going to call that Coin MAT for coin material. Now for color, I want to load an actual image instead of it being a color that I'm loading. So if I click on this right here, I can open up or create a render node for file. So I'll open file, and I need to navigate to where I put that. And since I didn't set my project up like I usually do, I have to go to where that is. There it is. I'm going to load up that PSD. I'm going to hit open. All right. And now I'm going to add that to my model. So I'm going to right click and add or assign material to selected. Wait a minute. Also, I named this wrong. I'm pretty sure it's a gem. All right. All right, so hold on a second. I have this selected. I right click and I go to assign material. It's not changing. If I middle mouse button, drag it over to there, still not changing. Why is that happening? Not lighting, but under shading. Yep. Turn that on. There it is. So now I have an ability to see my image on my object. So now my material is working for me. Now this may actually look okay. It sort of looks like there's some shadows on this. Let's look at this in perspective mode. Oh, all right, I'm done. Who cares? Now, what I want us to be thinking about is how do we paint sort of with light and shadow? And as you see, when I move this thing around, it looks faceted, it looks okay. But let's turn off lights, or let's turn that on to flat lighting, and you'll see what actually this material looks like. Just a solid green with our lines that represent our UVs on there. So we need to make this a little bit more fancy. And to do that, I'm going to go into my Photoshop file, and I'm going to make a new layer. This new layer I'm going to add to trace some shapes. So this new layer, let's say that we use this tool now. This is called Polygon Lasso tool. And this allows us to wrangle some polygons. And by that I mean just make some hard edge selections. So I'm going to just left click using this tool, and you'll see that it's allowing me to kind of make a selection like this. By doing that, I'm just going to go ahead and go into Edit, and then Fill again, and then Foreground Color. Okay. Now it doesn't look any different. And the reason why is because this color is the same as that color. If I turn that off, you can see it here. I'm going to make this work for me a little bit better by going into my effects, and we're going to color overlay. So now that I have color overlay on, I can change what that color is. I'm going to change that to maybe a light green. I'm going to hit OK. Now, if I ever wanted to go back to that default color, I can turn off effects, and now I'm into that base color again. So now I have this one gem color over here. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to make another colored facet. So I'm going to go into my selection tool, marquee selection. And I'm going to select this one. Okay. Now, again, I'm going to go to my effects, and I'm going to go to color overlay. And maybe this time it's a little bit darker than that last one. I'm going to hit OK. Does this not want to update? Cool, buddy. Let me see. I got that. I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to OK. Oh, what did I do? I didn't fill. Edit, fill. There we go. So, the thumbnails tell you if something exists or doesn't. If I turn off that base color, now I have two colors right here. Okay. Let's go to another side. So I'm going to go into another one and just grab this and select this part right here. Okay, and I'm going to go with maybe a darker green. So I'm going to click on this, double click, go to a green. Now I don't want to desaturate this, so I want to maintain some saturation on that color. So over on the right side, you're seeing much more vibrant colors than on the left side. So realize if stuff's starting to look gray, it's because you went over to this side. So I'm going to go maybe over here, hit OK, edit, fill. Okay. Now you can see how I can start to build this out. Let's say you made a mistake. I'm going to zoom in. Let's say you made a mistake. It's okay. Polygon lasso tool. We can just select that little area that we forgot. Close up that by just double clicking anywhere, and it closes that selection tool. Edit, fill again. All right, now we have that whole piece selected. Now I can keep going. It's going to bore you to keep finishing this off. But let's check our progress right now. I'm going to turn off my UVs. I don't want that on. I just want to see the color. We go to File, Save As, PSD, Save, Yes. Now in Maya. Uh-oh. I know I saved that and I have the color on it. Why isn't it updating? Well, Maya's kind of a jerk about that for us. The default for Maya is not to auto-reload textures, which is really, really frustrating. You might have to click on the object for it to do that. Now, if it doesn't do that still, underneath Windows, Settings and Preferences, there is a spot in here where auto load textures is on, and that is files and projects. And on the bottom you'll see, so preferences, so we went to Windows, settings and preferences, it popped up this, and then under files and projects, just make sure automatically reload updated image files is on, hit save, and then that should auto reload for us. So now we have this. Okay, it's starting to get there. Let's add a couple little other things on here. I'm gonna make this main shape in the middle. So I'm gonna go layer 3, I'm gonna go above that one. So I don't wanna be above my UVs, I just wanna be above layer 3. And I wanna basically select around this shape. Now, to ensure that you get a straight line when you are using Photoshop, if you hold the Shift key, it will straighten out those lines for you. That's a nice little technique to use. So I'm going to left click there and end the selection. So I have something like this. I'm going to sample. Maybe a color sort of like that reference color I'm looking at here. And I'm going to hit Edit, Fill. Okay. Let me go a little bit lighter than that because it looks a little too similar to the other one. So fill. Let's first change this out. Edit. Fill. Okay. Now, you might notice there's these little lines across here. That's an easy thing to be able to replicate in Maya or in Photoshop. I have right now this object. Now, if I hold down the Control key and left click on this, watch what happens. So I have this little shape that I made. Control, left click, it selects the whole thing. That's pretty helpful. Why would I want to do that? Because I wanted that shape. So that allows me to select that shape. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new layer. And you notice I don't have that shape there anymore, but I have a selection. So I'm going to press this button. This is a layer mask. All that's doing is saying anywhere you paint, you can paint in the white part, but anywhere that's black, you cannot have paint show up there. So that's what's going to allow for me to do something like this. I'm going to use a brush. And if I were to paint, and I'm going to use like a crazy color so we can see it. If I try to paint anywhere, and I make sure that I'm in my layer and not my mask, so I'm clicking right here. If I click over here, all I'm doing is painting within that layer with the mask applied. So I can't paint on other objects. That's extremely helpful. What I'm going to do instead is I'm going to select across here, make a shape, And I'm going to go to the greens. So I'm going to sample the greens. You'll notice when color shows up, color picker, you can actually use an ink dropper. Just by left clicking on a source, it'll bring up that color for you. So I'm going to actually sample that, and I'm going to go to a really light green. Now, what I'm going to end up doing, I'm going to hit OK. I actually realized I need to make a different shape. I don't want to select all the way there. I'm actually going to go here. So maybe here, in here. So I made a shape like this. I'm kind of trying to emulate that right there. Now I'm going to hit Edit, Fill. Okay. Now I'm going to do another shape. You'll notice it's maintaining that inside of that little box there. That's good. I'm going to go around here. Edit, Fill. And now I have these little gleams or glints, whatever you want to call them, on a jewel. I'm going to hit File, Save. And now let's look what we got here. Okay. So we're starting to get a buildup of a shape on this model that feels a little bit more like it's shiny, but it isn't. Again, this is like early resources. Let's say this is for a 3DS game or something. You can't have super intense models. So we're using just the simplest of forms to represent a shiny little jewel, right? So I have that. Let's try and add that little spot right there. And it's the same idea of what we've already been talking about. So I'm going to go to this layer that green is on. I'm going to make a mask. So to make a mask, Control, left click. So I have that selected. I'm going to make a new layer above that and make a mask. Now, I'm going to sample a different color for green. I'm going to go lighter than this one. So right now, if I sample that by clicking on my color picker, sampling that, I'm going to go above it, hit OK. And I'm just going to left click and select something like that. Maybe that's a little bit too big. So I'll go something like that. And so now I'm making sure I have that layer selected, not the mask, but that layer. Edit, Fill. OK. Now I have this. Let's see, File, Save. OK. So we're building up a little shiny model. Now, to show even more shininess on this model is the last technique I'm going to show you guys for this one. I'm going to use the brush tool. And so that being said, I'm going to make sure I actually organize all these pieces. And if you can't start to find your stuff because it gets complicated, a lot of the stuff I work with is like 100 different layers usually, so it can start to get really crazy. Move this up. You'll notice right above the Layers tab, you can get a little arrow showing up. Drag that upwards. You can even pull out properties and close that one. I'm going to leave adjustments on there. So this is just an easy way to stay organized and find your stuff better. Right now I want to make sure all of my colors are all organized in one piece. So I'm going to take all of these and hit Control G. And that's going to give me a group. Now another way to do that is just to press this little button right here. And that folder will group it. So we can call those shinies. I don't know. Now I'm going to go a layer above, and I'm going to do one last thing to this model, and it's just to give a little bit of definition across some of these corners. You'll see there's darker ones right here. There's some higher highlights up here. How do we replicate that? Well, let's turn on our UVs. We have a new layer, and let's sample a highlight color. So I just clicked over here and then clicked on a color I'd like to kind of reference. I'll hit OK. I'm going to press the B key for a brush. And right now, here's our brush. Here's all the stuff that we can do to turn that on or off or modify. What I'm going to do is change this to a, let's go to General Brushes. We'll go Hard Round. And I'm going to reduce my size of that brush. Now I can use this slider to change the size of my brush by left clicking and dragging, or I can use the bracket keys, your open bracket key will reduce the size of it, and your close bracket key will increase the size of that. This is a way better way to be able to work than to sit there and have to modify that by clicking over here. Because a lot of the times when you're working, you're going to want to change the size of that brush on the fly. So now that I have that, I'm going to call this light line work. And I'm going to just go from the top. I'm going to left click, and I'm going to go down. I'm going to hold down Shift and left click. Okay, I'm going to go over here. Left click, Shift, left click. Okay. Now from here, I'm going to left click, hold down Shift, and then left click. And what this is doing is anywhere you click and then move and then hold down Shift and click again, what that's doing is going to connect that line in a straight line for you, which is extremely helpful and fast way to get your line works in. So that's cool. I can keep doing this to define the edgings of this. Now I want to contrast that with the bottom ones with some darker greens. So let me make a new layer, put that underneath. Let's call this dark line work. And here I'm going to change this to a darker green. Just offset that so it's not exactly that color. Now I'm going to go and do the same thing. I'm going to left click, hold down Shift, click, click, click. So I have Shift already held down each time I'm doing that, and it allows for me to get some definition. Now I didn't finish this. I didn't add the tone here and then maybe a different color right there, but you're kind of seeing how I could piece this together pretty quickly. Now, let's see what this looks like in 3D. So File, Save, and then now, okay. Not my favorite yet. Can use some more definition. There definitely needs to be, right now it's throwing us off. This doesn't seem weighted or balanced because in our reference we can see these are darker and less saturated, and then the top is lighter. That's not happening here. If we actually cut off or hid, that looks a lot better up here than the other part. Can I hide the other part? Let's see. Yeah, if we drag this over, yeah, that's not selling it for me yet. So that's kind of just from experience knowing, like it's not weighted yet. It doesn't have the colors there. So this is starting to happen. And what I want you guys to realize too is the context. If this is a tiny, tiny, tiny little model, and let's say that it's going to be on the ground. So let's give ourselves a ground plane just for context here. And let's say that link is yay high. That means this rupee needs to be about that big. And if this is a top-down exploration game, you're never going to get that close to it. So that's pretty okay. I can also now do something like so you can see. And I'd have to adjust my animations because right now this needs to be set to linear. You don't want any extra stuff there. But we can see how that could be an acceptable little power up or coin. So if we hit play and we looked at it from the size it needs to be at, it's getting there. It needs some touch-ups on it, but that's starting to work. Now, there is a technique that we can add to this to make it even feel like there's more dimensionality to it. What we could do, and this is the last tool I'm going to show you guys before we actually start to work on this, is this piece right here. I'm going to make a new layer. I'm going to make sure I'm right underneath my UVs, and I'm going to go to this tool right here. It's called the gradient tool, and it is super, super helpful. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select this one right here, and what this is giving me is a transparency to a color. It's not two tones or anything like that. It's transparent to color. So if I left click and drag down, Notice what happened on my model, or my texture. It's green, and all of a sudden it's transparent. That's the opposite way I should have went. So I just start from the bottom. I'm going to turn on my UVs to actually see. I'm going to left click here and go up. Okay. The problem when we do this, notice how it kind of fogs out our model, or our texture. It kind of looks like it's like in this murky green. So a way to be able to fix that is to go into this right here under normal. I'm going to turn on multiply. What multiply does is it takes a color and it kind of like bakes in that color over your object. And so we can see how that can change things quite a bit using different effects. And multiply is the one I'm going to use for now. And I'm going to turn off this part. And let me delete that and show you again. If I did this even smaller, it's going to go only maybe halfway up. So from here to here, it's only going to go up that point. And if I turn on multiply again, it's only going from here to there. If we were to do that multiple times, it'll keep adding that to our object. So just a smart way to be able to work. I'm going to turn this part off and save and see what that does to the depth of my object in the sense of just how 3D it looks. Now it looks like sort of there's some shadow on the ground of it. So if I were to hit play, it's starting to look a little bit better. Now you don't have to animate this or anything like that. I'm just showing how this might fit into there. So all we're doing for this first one is we're going to use shapes to cut out using our marquee selection tool, or our polygon lasso, sorry. We're going to use polygon lasso and cut out shapes for the UVs and then fill those with solid colors. We are then going to do some eraser moves, or not eraser, but shapes using our mask. And then what the end result should look like is this right here. Now, we're only going to talk about this one today. I'm going to let us work on that. The next thing we'll do next class is this coin, and I'm going to show you how to get that to happen. All I'm looking for submissions for this class, for this one, is PSDs of the coin and PSDs of the gem. So I don't need the actual files. I have those. I'll link those in on my own. So this is what we'll do. Questions? And how many people have used Photoshop before? All right. So some of you kind of get it. I do have a tutor in here now as well. Garrett is going to be our tutor. He'll be in here the entire class. So if you need assistance, please let Garrett or I know, and that way we can get you some help. Garrett will be doing tutoring also Mondays and Wednesdays at what time?
Mondays and Wednesdays, 3:30 to 5:30, and Tuesdays and Thursdays, 11 to 1.
Yes, Tuesdays and Thursdays, 11 o'clock till 1 o'clock. So if you need assistance at any of those times, Garrett can help out. It's important for us to know so that we can get you signed up. It doesn't cost you anything, but it's definitely a free resource to use. Okay. So that gave you that error. Let's see if we can index it. I've never seen that error, which is kind of horrifying.